I'll tell you a story. There's this guy named Yusuf from a long time ago. Oh man, it was late 1800s, so a long time ago. Big wrestler. He was like 350 pounds wrestler, and it was not, fat weight. He was buff. He was a strong dude. He was called Yusuf, the Terrible Turk, and he just dominated throughout Europe. Nobody could beat him. He decided he'd come to America and challenge the reigning wrestling champion in America, whose name was Strangler Lewis. Strangler Lewis had this technique where he would take his opponents and get behind them and put his arm around their neck and basically strangle them till they passed out. And then he would pin them and win. Strangler Lewis, though, was only 200 pounds. So 350 pounds, Yusuf comes over on a boat, gets there to America, and is taking on now this much smaller guy, right? You would think this is like a David and Goliath story, only it doesn't end that way, because Strangler Lewis, who is undefeated in the States, nobody can outmaneuver him. It doesn't matter how big they have been. He has been able to choke them and pin them, realizes when he sees Yusuf for the first time that he has a problem. Yusuf is so massive, he has no neck. There's nothing for him to get his arm around. And he tried. There was like head, shoulders, that's it. He's like a turtle. There's no neck. He tried to get that arm around and tried it, but there's nothing there. He couldn't choke him. Finally, Yusuf flipped Strangler onto the mat and pinned him and won. And he was awarded this beautiful, big old gold belt plus $5,000, which back then, I mean, this is like the end of like 1898, something like that. This is a lot of money here. $5,000, but he's going back to Europe, so he demands all of it in gold. Now, the rest of the story is just legend. But here's what we think happened, because Yusuf never made it back to Europe. Midway across the Atlantic, the ship sinks. As it is sinking, Yusuf tries to jump onto a lifeboat but doesn't make it. Not just because he's 350 pounds, but because he was wearing his gold belt everywhere he went, and he had stuffed all his gold into his pockets and into his bags. He was too heavy to make the leap, and he hit the water and sunk like an anchor and was pinned to the bottom of the ocean. That's the story, or at least the legend of Yusuf, the Terrible Turk. Now, we're going to continue in our series looking at Jesus' generous life. And we're going to pick up where we left off last week. Jesus, if you remember, has just had lunch with some religious leaders, some Pharisees and scribes. Only he didn't exactly get to eat anything, because as he looked around the table, he realized everybody here, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the scribes, the teachers of the law, these people all have really pretty garments on and look all clean, and they got their hands washed, ready to eat. They all look the part of religious men, but they didn't do what religion is supposed to do. Religion gets a bad name because religion is supposed to be taking care of the widows and the orphans and visiting the sick and helping the poor and fighting for injustice. That's the job of people who follow God. And these are the leaders. And Jesus just looks at them and knows they're just hypocrites. They look the part, but they're not really the part. The part is they look good. The duty they're supposed to do is to actually do good. And they're not doing it. They're not living it. And so Jesus doesn't eat anything, and now he's back outside talking to the crowds, and as he's talking to the crowds, he just kind of lays into the Pharisees again and says, look, I don't want you guys to be like them at all. They're hypocrites, and like yeast grows throughout the batch and puffs up the whole batch, I don't want you to even be around them, because that hypocrisy will grow in you. I don't want that to be a part of you at all. And then he warns them, because he had just offended the religious leaders big time. He warns them, look, they're going to come after me, and then they're going to come after you. They're going to nail me to the cross, and I'm going to bleed, but my blood isn't going to be enough for them. They're going to look for your blood. And so he begins to teach them about persecution. Now, we're not quite ready to talk about persecution this morning, but we will. What we need to talk about, though, is what happened when Jesus was interrupted talking about persecution. Because Jesus is now going to say, look, they're going to try you, and they're going to put you in prison, and they're going to kill you. But there's things worse than death. There's hell, and there's issues bigger than life itself, and I don't want you to worry about, in fact, I don't even want you to worry about when you stand before judges and have to because my Spirit will teach you what to say. And as he's teaching all this stuff, he is interrupted. Hey, teacher, I have a question. Jesus is talking about heaven and hell and life and death, and I got a question. Now, this wasn't a Pharisee who was offended by anything Jesus said. This guy wasn't anybody that wanted to argue any points. This guy just wanted to interrupt Jesus because Jesus was talking about when you stand before judges, and he's like, I've got a case I want you to solve, Jesus. So Jesus stops talking about persecution to address this guy. So we don't know his name, but would it be okay if we just call this guy Yusuf? Because he's going to talk about money. And how money's more important to him than, evidently, heaven and hell, life and death. So here's what it says. Someone, Yusuf, in the crowd said to him, Jesus, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. So evidently he feels wronged, and very well could be wronged. We don't know. That's not really the point. Jesus is just kind of taken aback by this guy who, I'm talking about being persecuted for standing up for what is right, and all you're concerned about is your own. I'm talking about being the Lord, being the Messiah of God, and you guys following me, and you're going to be persecuted, you're going to be put in prison, you're going to be put in chains, you're going to be executed for this cause, and don't worry because there's bigger issues at stake, and those that are on the right side of it are going to live forever, and there's blessings to live forever. And he's, Jesus, wait, did you say that when we are on trial, you're going to help us? I got a problem. I need help. I want more money. Well, he may deserve the money. I don't know. It doesn't really matter, right? He's just got his priorities out of line. And so Jesus responds. Money does this, doesn't it? Doesn't money just kind of take our focus off of what's most important? Have you found that to be true? Money takes our focus off of what's most important. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. All of a sudden, if there's a money issue, it's like, everything else can wait. We got money problems, and I can't sleep at night, even though there may be other issues that I really shouldn't be sleeping at night, like people that are lost or people that are making wrong moral choices or whatnot. But if the bills don't match up, and here's the thing about money, whether we have it or we don't have it, we worry. If we don't have it, of course, how are we going to get it? Because we got bills and we got to make it match up, right? But if we have it, isn't there just as much? Because what am I going to do with this and protect this? And I got to have enough insurance, and I hope that we can fulfill that cool dream we have if we can. And we worry about protecting it, or we worry about getting it. It seems like it doesn't matter if you're in a rich season or poor season of life. Man, this just can be consuming. It can distract us off of what's most important. And so Jesus says to this guy, man, Yusuf, who appointed me judge or arbitrator between you two, you brothers, you know? Jesus, by the way, is judge and arbitrator, but for the bigger issues of life, right? For the heaven and hell issues of life. He's going to be the one that stands at the door, judges us, or sits on the seat and judges us. But civil affairs, he's like, I got bigger things to talk about. And he's going to go back and talk about persecution after he's done with this. But this is important enough. This is what we're talking about. So this man is wanting, and Jesus is saying, no, I'm not going to do it. I will not. I'm not going to step in. Look. Then he said to them, so he's talking to the whole crowd plus the man, so the man can still hear, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Greed is sneaky. Greed will creep in when you think you're set and you've made a lot, right? It'll creep in there. You think, well, I got no money. I can't worry about money because I ain't got any. Well, that doesn't really work, right? Because you're worried about the bills and about getting money and how you're going to make the next payment and so on. He goes on and says, a man's life does not consist in the abundance, the overflow of his possessions. Your life is not about gather, gain, get, is it? Well, it's not supposed to be. Because if it becomes that. It's like Yusuf the wrestler that made his life about his possessions, and he wore his possessions, and his possessions rebelled against him. His possessions actually are what took him down. So we could say it this way: he made his life his possessions, and his possessions took his life. Right? So I'm reading this article about a psychologist who thinks that all these disputes, because there's always a dispute among family when there's some kind of money involved, isn't there? When there's an inheritance issue. In fact, you have heard the saying before. I'm sure you have, so you can just finish it for me. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? But when there's money and there's inheritance, the saying actually goes like this: where there's a will, there's a war. Right? And so this psychologist is like, no, I think that all inheritance battles really are about hurt feelings. Now, I'm not a shrink. He knows more. He's got extra letters after his name. He's smart, right? But honestly, do you think that people that are in a dispute over money, that their main concern is whether somebody gives them a nice apology or not? Or a nice Hallmark card? I think they want a nice check. That's what I think they want. That's what they're after. Greed is like a poison. It invades our life. It takes over. And it makes us think about things other than what's most important in life. Especially, it takes us away from thinking about God. And so we need to treat it that way. So Jesus is going to, let me share this verse with you first. This comes from Ephesians. But among you, there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality. And the reason why I want to share this verse with you is because oftentimes we think that there is a hierarchy of sins, right? And we think that there are these A categories of sins like sexual immorality. And that, oh man, that's up there. That's up there. But greed, when you're talking about greed, now that's not quite an A sin. It goes back down into the B category because, all of us actually have a little bit of greed. It's hard not to think about selfish things like it's mine. And if you're like thinking, I don't have a problem with greed, I think it's a lot like the person who doesn't admit that they have at least a little bit of pride. The last person to admit pride probably has the most, actually, right? Well, I'm good. I never do that. I hear that from my children, and I'm thinking, yeah, that's just like a clear indication. I never do that? That's a clear indication you're covering up what really is deep inside, right? And so here's the thing. We have these categories of sin, and we all struggle just a little bit with greed, but we kind of get comfortable with it, and we get relaxed with it, and we kind of think that greed is okay. I mean, it's bad, but it's not as bad as like sexual sin. I mean, we all nod to that. I mean, sexual immorality, come on, that's up there. But greed, it's down here. It's not as big a deal, right? That's where we treat it. It's almost, in the same category as putting on the toilet paper roll backwards. That's what I'm thinking. It's that kind of wrong. There is a right way. You know that, right? Come over to my house. You'll see them all the right way. So greed, though, is down here, and we get comfortable with it, and just a little bit of it is okay. And yet, Paul says, wait, I'm not done. I'm not done. He just laid into sexual immorality. We're all nodding, yep. Or of any kind of impurity, that still sounds like sexual sin. Or of greed. What? Because these are proper for God's holy people. He's saying it makes you as unclean. Greed will, when it gets into your life, it starts to take over who you're in allegiance with, who you're following after, who is your Lord. Money becomes your Lord if greed begins to grow in you. Now, at this point, Jesus does what Jesus often does, and he tells a story. And the reason I think he tells a story is because he likes to, first of all, expose the wound. The wound is open and it's raw and we hide it and we're good, right? And he exposes it. He's like, no, I know it's there. It's right there, isn't it? Yeah, and it's tender, Jesus. Could you walk gently on it? He says, hey, no problem. And grabs a big thing of salt and goes, rubs it in there, right? That's Jesus. Let's tell a story. The story is the salt. You don't know if you quite have greed in you, or you don't know. Well, let me show you what it actually looks like, and then you can see if this might be you or not. Let me tell you a story. This is what Jesus does. So here's his story. And he told them a parable. That's a story. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. I love the fact that Jesus begins his story with the ground gave the crop, because this man thinks he's all that, right? He's a rich man. I got all this stuff. It's actually the ground that gave him all this good stuff. So this was a good year. The ground produced a crop. So he thought to himself, he likes thinking to himself. You'll see this. He talks to himself a lot. What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Side note, he actually has barns, we're told. And he says, I have no place to store my crops. He actually does have barns. They're just full. And so he's like, okay, so I've got everything I need. My barns are full. I want more. Isn't that what greed does? Wait. If you have your barns full and that's enough to make it through the year, why not give the excess away? Right? And yet what do we sometimes do? I got more. That's more for me, right? And I'm not judging there. I'm just saying that's a way that greed can start to work its way in your life, right? I've got more than I was hoping and I was needing and I was planning, and now I'm blessed. Well, wouldn't that be a good opportunity to bless others? No, let's do this. Let's do what this man did. We do this, right? This is what I'll do. He's talking to himself again. I'll tear down my barns, perfectly good ones, and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I'll say to myself, talking to himself again, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Not only does he have things that he can eat from, because it's all crops, but he can go to the marketplace and sell them and get whatever possessions he wants. He's got it made. Look, I'll have many years of luxury. Before we finish, isn't this what we're taught to do? Isn't this the culture we live in? You're supposed to take advantage of the company's 401k, and when that limit is reached, then you open your own IRA and you fill that to its maximum levels every year. And on top of that, if you can find other ways, maybe dabble in real estate, whatever, right? We're taught to do this, to play. It's called wisdom. And a certain amount of it, sure, I get that. Jesus is trying to make a point. This guy's barns were full. This guy had an abundance. It was overflowing, and he kept thinking all he needed was more, and all he needed was more, and all that he needed was more. That's what greed does. It begins to take over your life. I'll just take it easy. Look at this. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Isn't that the golden dream? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Aren't we supposed to retire and move to Florida, right next to the Dickersons? Aren't we supposed to do that? Play golf? Yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. God couldn't have timed that better. Love you guys. Come on, this is what we're taught, right? This is the American dream. And we would think that Jesus would say to this man, look, this is what a wise individual would do. Well done. You've done it the right way. No, he lays into him, right? But God said to him, you fool. Foolishness is like living a way that's opposed to the will of God. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Other people then are going to enjoy. You store up, and you got these bigger barns, and you filled them up, and now what? Other people are going to be enjoying those. After, of course, the family inheritance dispute war, they're going to then enjoy these things that you didn't get to enjoy because you made your life about all of this. And Jesus goes on and says, this is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself but is not rich towards God. What does that phrase mean, not rich towards God? Well, it could simply mean the opposite of storing up things for yourself. Storing up things for God. How in the world do you store up things for God? How do you invest in things? How do you open a God IRA? Right? How how do you change where your possessions are located? Because these are things we can feel and touch, and you can't actually feel and touch that which is spiritual, can you? It's an interesting phrase. I think this would be a good place to pause and just talk about something that Jeff Strite said that I thought was really cool. And also I want to give him credit for some of the other ideas in this message. But he was talking about how, he said, think about this. Abraham was incredibly wealthy. He had herds, cattle, and he had sheep. And many servants, and it took a great deal of time for him to travel as he left his home country to the land God promised him. He was incredibly wealthy. In fact, so much so that his nephew Lot and him, they had to divide the land up because there were just too many of them. And then Jacob comes along, and Jacob has all this wealth. He has camels too. I don't know, camels may be a status symbol or something, but it's, camels. I don't know why you need camels, but camels, he's got lots of camels. Then you got King David. King David was the wealthiest king. He had treasure. If you read what David actually donated to the temple, it would blow your mind the amount of wealth out of his personal treasury, out of his own personal treasure. Not the kingdom's treasure, not the temple's treasure, out of his own treasure. His personal sacrifice towards the temple would blow you away in how rich this man was. And here's the deal. Solomon, his son, was richer. All right. Do you read anywhere where God condemns Abraham, Jacob, or Solomon for their wealth? Here are men who are wealthy, and yet they're not leaned into. Why? Because they were rich towards God. It's not about how much you have or how much you don't have. It's about what you do with what you have. And these men got it. These men understood something. In fact, you could say it this way. They put their trust in God instead of their possessions. And that's where Jesus is going with this story. Don't make your life about your stuff. And you can do it whether you have it or whether you don't have it. So, where does greed often come from? Where does this ugly thing that creeps into our life, where does it start? How does it get in there? Jesus actually answers the question with what he says next. He says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry." Worry is how greed creeps in. We already talked about worry. It makes sense because when you have nothing, you worry about how you're going to get something in order to make that work. If you have a lot, you worry about how you're going to keep that. Worry will never, ever allow you to rest because it always wants more. Somebody was asked one time, how much is enough? The answer was just a little bit more, right? Because that's what worry does. I just need more. And it's never satisfied. And that's where greed comes in, from worry. When you worry about your life, what you'll eat, or about your body, what you'll wear. Life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Don't make your life about your possessions, because you'll end up like Yusuf in the Bible story, fighting over his inheritance. Or Yusuf, the wrestler, pinned to the bottom by his own possessions. Don't make your life about your possessions. There's this passage, I love this proverb. It says, "Keep falsehood and lies far from me." I love this. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. The reason I love this is because I don't want lies in my life. I want purity in my life. But the reason I love this is because of the rest of it. It ties it together and says, "Give me neither poverty." I'm like, yeah, give me no poverty. I don't want poverty. I've been waiting for a verse like that. Don't give me... But then he ties this together. "But give me only my daily bread." No, don't give me only my daily bread. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Could we just do the first half? Give me no poverty. I like that. Why? Why? Otherwise, you may have too much and disown, and too much. I may have too much, and I may disown you and say, "Who is the Lord?" I'm just learning to read this week. I will get better. Hooked on phonics and me, we're doing well. When we get so caught up in our stuff and we start worrying about whether we have it or we don't have it, it starts to take us away from God. And it's not just a problem for certain people, it's a problem for everybody. And we're teaching our children this. We're teaching our children to actually worry because they're watching us in our worry going, oh, that's how you're supposed to live. You're supposed to worry from paycheck to paycheck, or you're supposed to worry about this investment, that investment, and whatever. You're supposed to worry because they're taught, they're taught from a real young age. I was taught to worry about money from a young age. I didn't even know I was being taught it by the games we played. Remember some of the games we played? I'm just going to share one with you. Here it is. It's the game of life. Do you remember the game of life? Do you remember the rules to the game of life? I mean, this is the game of life. This is the one where you have the little car and you have the little pink people and little blue people and you get babies and then you get more pink and blue people. Well, you get married first because, in life you do it the right way and then you have little babies and all that. And the spinner comes off. You remember that too? The spinner always came off because that's the way life is. That's exactly how life is. What's the goal of life? The game of life. As a little kid, I thought I knew the goal. That was to get to the end. I was at the end first, the first time I played the game of life, and I was told I did not win. What? I was the fastest car. Of course, as a preacher with kids, we should have a new version of the game of life. The game of life is to treat people kindly and to... why is that not in the rule book? The kindest person wins. The one who helps the lady across the street wins. That's what I was taught in Boy Scouts. No, in the game of life, do you remember the rules? If you read the rules of the game of life, you know what the rules are? When you get to the end, it's the one that has the most money that wins. That's what we're teaching our kids. If you don't have the most money, you're a loser. Only the people that can go to millionaire acres are the winners. Die rich is the goal of life, and we teach our kids to worry about it. All right, so let's review. Greed is a disease. Paul says it's just as unclean as sexual sin. It makes us ignore God. It makes us distracted and we don't even, who is the Lord? Who is the Lord? And is often caused by worry. Now, not all worry leads to greed. I get that. But isn't it true that we'll compromise our own convictions when we're in that tight spot and need just a little bit more? We might fudge on the numbers, or we might be tempted to steal or lie, because that's what greed does. So what's the cure for greed? How do we cure this thing? Again, Jesus has the answer. The next thing that he says is this: consider how the lilies grow. And I know when you get to this part and you're a guy, you're like, oh, this is the flowery part of Jesus' message. I don't want to read the flowery part. Come on, admit it, guys. We don't like the lilies section of this, do we? Consider the lilies. I don't want to go smell the roses. I don't want to look at the pretty flowers. But this is his answer. Wait, this is the answer. Consider the lilies. No, seriously, he says, bend down and look at it. It's pretty. Guys, you can say it's pretty. I hope you've said that to your wife. Come on, it's pretty. The flower is perfectly designed. It's beautiful. He says, I just want you to look at it. They don't labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon. We talked about Solomon. All his wealth, in all its splendor, was not dressed like one of these. He says, come on. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, so temporary, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? So what's the answer? What's the answer to greed? How do we get past worry that makes us greedy? What's the answer? It's right here. Faith itself is belief enough to trust God in his promises. To step out and do something because you believe enough to trust him. It's not enough to believe. You've got to trust. And so the cure is trust. Jesus is saying, okay, do you trust me? Because I will lead you out of this thing that is choking you and is keeping you from being fully committed to God and is choking your children, is teaching them not to be committed to God, is keeping you away from church, is keeping you away from being on fire from Him and worshiping Him and being completely just blown away by the work that He wants to do in your life, and answered prayer even. I'm going to show you if you will trust me. You trust me? That's Jesus talking. Do you trust me? Come on. Then do what I'm going to tell you to do. If you trust me, He says, sell your possessions and give to the poor. That's the only cure for greed. Let that sink in. Because we want other answers, don't we? Come on, Jeff, there's got to be more. No, He says, I'm going to give you the retirement plan. You ready for God's retirement plan? Here it is. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out. Because purses in this world will have holes in them and stuff's going to fall out. I want you to have purses that will not wear out, where you can keep sticking treasures in. He says a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted. It will never run dry, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. He says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If you want to have an amazing retirement plan, then you start investing in heaven. You start giving. The only way you're going to get it to heaven, the only way you're going to pass it forward, the only way you're going to invest in it, this is His IRA plan now, is to give stuff away here. And when you help somebody out, and when you are there for somebody, and when you sacrifice yourself, and when you give, and when you serve, and when you love, you're making deposits in heaven. Keep giving yourself away. Keep giving yourself away. Keep giving yourself away, and you will have riches beyond imagination in heaven. It is the best retirement plan there is. You didn't know you were coming to a seminar today, did you, on retirement? Give. Ever wonder why God talks so much about, His Word talks so much about tithing, giving 1/10 of your income and giving and they sold their possessions. It's all over the place, right? The early church did that. They sold their possessions to help out the poor. Why is it all over the place? Why in the world are we doing this series on generosity? And there's so many aspects to generosity. I get that, and we're trying to hit on all of them. But you got to admit that giving, being faithful in regularly giving to the kingdom work of God, is a huge part of not only the Old Testament where it was demanded in the law, but the New Testament where it was freely. God gave them freedom. He said, I want you to be cheerful givers. I want you not, if you're worried about your giving, don't give. You're not there yet. Give in the way that would actually free you, which is a sacrificial. I'm taking the reins of this world, the ropes of this world, the chains of this world off of me and my family by being faithful and consistent in giving stuff away. And the more that I help other people, and the more that I help the cause of God, the more that our focus as a family is on the things that are eternal, and we're making eternal deposits. But the cool thing is, it actually affects your attitude here in life. It changes you now. It is something that sanctifies you here and now in life. So you had a pink card. If you didn't notice the pink card, you're sitting on it. We pulled that out. We are doing the 2nd mile challenge, where we're challenging everybody to do what Jesus said. He said, if someone demands of you to go 1 mile with him, go the 2nd mile. Because that 1st mile you have to, the 2nd mile you get to choose to, and it's in that choosing, when you choose to do it, that you're being like Christ, because Christ chose to came here and die for you. Go the 2nd mile. Live in such a way as where you're thinking all the time, what else can I do? What else can I do at work that is not asked of me? And man, you'll be a light in that workplace. That may be a dark workplace you work in, but you start going the 2nd mile and you change the culture in that workplace. Do it in your family, in your extended family, among your friend groups, in the places that you frequent. the places you volunteer. Go the second mile. And so I asked you last week to do this, and I was blown away by what I read. I pulled these out, and I was just going to use this in prayer time, just praying to God about what was on these cards, and I'm reading through them. I didn't even know how many I would get because I didn't introduce it at all until last Sunday where you came in. There's pink cards on the chair. Why are there pink cards on the chair? And you filled them out and you stuck them in the boxes at the door because I said I want totally anonymous. Don't put your name on it because it's not about your own glory. What did you do that went the second mile? I started reading through this, and I kid you not, I had tears streaming down my face. Now, that only happens normally when I'm with Ange and watching a chick flick, but I had tears. I mean, I'm blown away by what you have already done. And if you didn't share from last several weeks of a way you went the second mile, just write that down. If you shared last week, you might be thinking, wait, I already shared? I don't know if I have anything else. Think of a small way you went the second mile. Sometimes you do it, like I did a couple of things this week, and they were tiny, and I look back on them. I didn't even know at the time I was doing. Now, one thing I did know, I was like, okay, they want me to, and I'm like, I want to tell my daughter no. I'm going to tell my daughter no, because I got too much going on. And then I'm like, yeah, but you're the pastor, and you stood before the church, and you told them to go the second mile. I'm like, stop lecturing me, Jeff. So I said, yes, I'll do that. And then I said, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it with a cheerful heart. And I did, actually. Find a little way that you went the second mile. Write that down. Again, anonymous. Stick it in the box. I want you to consider something, though, for this week now, coming up, as you think about going the second mile this week. I want you to consider selling something and giving it to the work of the Lord. Isn't that what Jesus said? You want the quickest, fastest way to stop greed in your life? Sell something. Now, guys, no fair going into your wife's closet and selling something of hers. I know I told her this dress doesn't make her look fat, but I'm getting rid of it. Same thing, ladies. You can't go into his. You can agree on something together. What is it that you have that someone else could benefit from? There was actually somebody who gave away something very expensive to somebody in need. Just gave it to them. What if we all did that? Just consider it. Just pray over it. Think about it. Before you can give anything away, though, I have to share this. You have to give yourself away to Jesus. If you've never done that, you need to do that. Jesus gave himself on the cross to be your substitutionary atonement. He bled his lifeblood out, dying for your sin so that you don't have to suffer eternally in hell. He talked about heaven and hell issues, but in Christ Jesus, there is no hell for us. There's only heaven. He gave himself, and now he asks us to deny ourselves and give up our own life. If you've never given your life to Jesus, I want to invite you to do that right now, to confess him as Lord. I ask you to consider that. If you need other prayers, if you have other needs, this is your time. This is your invitation. If you're ready to just surrender and join the church, this is your time. I'm going to ask that you stand as we pray. Father God, we thank you that you have given Jesus the ultimate second mile. You gave everything away. You didn't have to. You desired to give us life, and you gave it through your Son. Now we ask that you would help us as we face this new week to give ourselves away in some way. And if we've never given ourselves to you fully, we pray that you would talk to and reach that individual that you are right now at work on their heart, that you would open up their heart to what you have to say. They'd surrender to you. And they'd accept your Son, Jesus Christ, as their personal Lord and Savior. I pray that they would confess Christ publicly, because Jesus told us if we confess before men, he will confess us before the Father, before you. Father, I pray for surrendered lives. lives identified in the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And I pray for this in Jesus' name. Amen. If you have a decision, come.